Jamal Whitaker stood frozen, drenched in sweat, as the professor accused him out loud of stealing a theory he'd written in silence at 3 a.m., alone in a dorm closet. The room didn't gasp. It shifted. Eyes narrowed. Doubt flooded in like a tide. No one asked for proof. No one asked him. Because genius in black skin was still treated like a glitch in the system. And just before Jamal could speak, Mercer opened his laptop and submitted the stolen theory as his own. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The air inside Langley Hall smelled of old chalk and polished ambition, the kind of room where futures were forged quietly in formulas and graphs. As the late summer sun filtered through the towering windows of the calculus lecture hall, students filed in, their voices a dull hum beneath the creak of folding desks and the click of laptop keys. Jamal Whitaker stepped inside, holding nothing but a composition notebook with dog-eared pages and a well-worn mechanical pencil. He didn't need a calculator. Numbers lived in his head like second language. Dressed in a simple gray hoodie and dark jeans, his presence wasn't flash. It was silent, focused, intentional. Still, his entrance landed differently. All around him, students glanced up, mostly white, some Asian, none black. One girl nudged her friend, whispering something behind a cupped hand. Jamal ignored it, scanning the back row. It was his habit. Observe first, speak later. At the front of the room stood Dr. Ronald Mercer, tall, trim, sharply dressed in a navy blazer and maroon tie. His silver hair was perfectly parted, his wire-rimmed glasses giving him the polished veneer of an academic titan. Mercer was famous at Riverside Tech for his demanding curriculum and brutal grading curves. Students feared him, not for his intellect, but for his disdain. He didn't suffer fools, or at least the ones he perceived as fools. When Mercer's eyes landed on Jamal, they narrowed just slightly. A flicker, a pause, not long enough to be called out, but long enough to be felt. Jamal sat in the second row, center. Not because he wanted attention, because he needed to see the board without squinting. He opened his notebook, and as Mercer began his opening monologue about the warrior's journey through calculus, Jamal was already scribbling limits and derivatives in the margins. This course, Mercer said, pacing across the front like a general preparing his troops, is not for dabblers. It's not for the faint of heart. You will either rise to the level of mathematical discipline, or you will drown. There is no in-between. Jamal didn't flinch. He was already running equations in his head, tweaking the integral method he'd developed over summer break, something he'd never seen in any textbook. Mercer turned, picked up a marker, and faced the board. Let's begin with a warm-up problem. Something light. He wrote an expression that sprawled across the whiteboard in sprawling loops and symbols. Lim x 20. Frups. Let's see who among you dares to try. No hands rose. A few heads bowed. A few fingers hovered above keyboards, trying to Google the answer fast enough to look clever. Except for Jamal. He stared at the equation, tilting his head slightly. Mercer's eyes swept the room, stopping again on Jamal. You there, he said, voice clipped. Name? Jamal Whitaker.
Mr. Whitaker, care to enlighten us?
There it was. The tone. Not an invitation, but a challenge. A performance test for the only black student in the room. Mercer had seen this play out before. He liked to believe he was fair, colorblind even, but he also believed that greatness came dressed a certain way, from a certain zip code, with a certain surname. Jamal didn't fit. Jamal stood without hesitation. You can't solve it directly, he said, walking toward the board. So you use the third-order Taylor expansion for sine. Murmurs swept through the room. Mercer's expression twitched. Jamal continued, writing cleanly on the edge of the board. Sin 4x approx 4x.
Dio.
So substituting, Jamal said, you get or die. 4 eeps for keep odds 54 xc. You know our keep odds 54 xc. He capped the marker, stepped back. Silence. Mercer's jaw was tight, the corners of his mouth unmoving. Correct, he said, his voice almost mechanical. But there was no praise in it, no acknowledgement of insight or process, just a terse confirmation, followed by the faintest narrowing of the eye. Jamal nodded and returned to his seat. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. The room's energy shifted. Students were whispering again, but this time it wasn't laughter or dismissal. It was intrigue. Mercer hadn't expected that. The lecture continued, but Mercer's tone lost its confidence. When he scribbled a partial differential equation on the board, he fumbled a variable. He corrected it quickly, but Jamal had already noticed, and noted it in his notebook. Not to weaponize, just to understand. After class, Jamal gathered his things slowly. A few students approached him, curious, asking about the Taylor series. He explained with clarity, but kept his tone light. He wasn't here to impress. He was here to learn. Mercer stayed behind, pretending to organize his briefcase. But his eyes followed Jamal, quietly, methodically. By the time the next lecture rolled around, Jamal had already submitted the first assignment and included an extra page of supplementary thinking, outlining an abstract limit theory he'd been exploring. It wasn't required. It wasn't even encouraged. But for Jamal, mathematics wasn't homework. It was art. When Mercer saw the page, he didn't smile, he didn't frown. He just slipped it into a separate folder, one with no label, and said nothing. In that moment, something crystallized. Mercer wasn't intrigued. He was threatened. Jamal noticed how his name was skipped when Mercer asked for volunteers. How Mercer corrected his pronunciation, deliberately calling him Jamal like a misfired guess. Subtle, deniable things. But stacked together they painted a pattern. Still Jamal didn't retreat. He came early, stayed late, solved bonus problems others couldn't touch. Then came the real test. Mid-lecture, Mercer pulled out a complicated proof, a multivariable theorem, with no clear resolution. This, he announced, is not on your syllabus. This is not on any exam. This is for those who claim to be curious. Let's see who has the curiosity to even attempt it. No one moved. Jamal's pencil scratched softly across his notebook. Mercer noticed. You have something to say, Mr. Whitaker. Jamal looked up, quiet and sure. You factored incorrectly. The room froze. Mercer turned sharply. Excuse me. Jamal rose again, walking to the board, gently correcting a mistaken term in the denominator. He rewrote the expression, smoother, clearer, then proved the result in 4 clean steps. When he finished, the room was silent. Mercer stared, not blinking, not moving. Because for the second time, the black student he underestimated had solved a problem he'd hoped would go untouched. Mercer's eyes didn't flicker with curiosity or respect. They narrowed with calculation. This wasn't about math anymore. The door to Dr. Ronald Mercer's office bore no nameplate, just a small brass number etched into a fading. Jamal Whitaker stood in front of it, his heart steady but alert, the way a violin string hums just before it's played. It was late afternoon, the halls quieter now, emptied of chatter and clumsy backpack traffic. Jamal had waited until most students cleared out. Not because he was nervous, but because he knew the space he occupied came preloaded with assumptions. Better to remove the distraction. He tapped the door lightly. Come in, came Mercer's voice, clipped, uncurious. Jamal entered, clutching his notebook. Inside, the office was orderly, sterile, bookshelves lined with dustless volumes. Certificates from MIT and Stanford framed perfectly. One wall showcased a single black and white photo, a younger Mercer standing beside a white-haired Nobel laureate. No family, no warmth. Mercer didn't look up from his computer. Yes? Jamal cleared his throat. I wanted to share something with you, a pattern I've been working on. Now Mercer looked up. Pattern? It started with a boundary condition problem. But the deeper I explored, the more it resembled an expansion framework, maybe even a new way of defining convergence within nonlinear systems. Mercer blinked. You're referring to the unit test on chapters? No, Jamal said, stepping forward. It's not from the syllabus. He opened his notebook and placed it on the desk. His handwriting was precise. The model flowed across the page like architecture, clean, daring, and breathtaking in its originality. Jamal watched Mercer's eyes track over the formulas, but Mercer didn't lean in, didn't nod. He didn't even touch the notebook. Instead, his lips parted with that same forced patience he used in lectures. And what exactly, Mercer said slowly, am I looking at? It's an extrapolation of the Bernoulli framework, but I applied it to irrational sequences. There's a recursive loop that allows... Mercer held up a hand. Where did you find this? Jamal blinked. I didn't find it. I developed it. A pause. Mercer leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. His eyes hardened, not with interest, but with scrutiny. You developed a new recursive system, he said flatly, in your dorm room, with no lab oversight, no graduate support, no theoretical advisor. Jamal stood tall. I don't need an advisor to see patterns. Mercer let out a dry chuckle. Mr. Whitaker, genius is not a hobby. I'm not treating it like one. Then you'll understand if I ask, who helped you with this? There it was. Not a question, an accusation. No one helped me, Jamal said, his voice low.
Really? Mercer tapped the notebook now, finally engaging.
But it wasn't admiration, it was suspicion. Because these formulations mirror Dr. Venkataraman's 2009 paper almost identically. A paper I doubt you've read. I read it last semester. That's why I deviated after the third-tier iteration. Mercer narrowed his gaze. Did you? Jamal clenched his jaw. Yes. There was a beat of silence, long and sharp. You want me to believe, Mercer said slowly, that an undergraduate first year at this institution just stumbled into advanced recursive modeling that even tenured scholars struggle to theorize? Jamal didn't respond. He didn't have to. Mercer stood, walking slowly around the desk, as if circling prey. Let me offer some advice, Mr. Whitaker. Ambition is admirable, but cutting corners to impress the wrong people will end poorly. I didn't cut anything, Jamal said, eyes locked. Then I suppose you won't mind submitting this to the Academic Review Board, with full disclosure of your process, your sources, and your identity. My identity? Jamal repeated. Mercer smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Background matters in math. It's not racist. It's reality. Some minds come prepared. Some come playing catch-up. There's no shame in it. Jamal's heart thudded. Not in fear, but in fury. The room didn't feel like an office anymore. It felt like a courtroom. And Mercer wasn't teaching. He was prosecuting. I came here to show you something I'm proud of, Jamal said. Not to be interrogated. Mercer shrugged. Then perhaps you should think more carefully about what kind of work you present, and where you present it. Jamal stared at the man, at the room, at the walls lined with awards from institutions that had never seen someone like him. Then, calmly, he picked up his notebook. I thought this school valued innovation, he said. Mercer smiled thinly. It does, but it also values integrity. Jamal stepped back. Maybe you should hold yourself to the same standard. Without waiting for a response, he turned and walked out. The door shut softly behind him. Outside in the hallway, the lights buzzed above. Jamal stood there for a long second, breathing through his nose, jaw clenched. There was no one to call, no faculty ally, just him. Alone, but not broken. He flipped open the notebook as he walked away, and began refining the third tier of his model. If they wanted to doubt him, let them. Doubt was fuel. Back inside the office, Mercer sat down slowly. He opened his email, clicked compose. To Dean Evelyn Hargrave. Subject concerning Calculus 3-1 student. Possible academic dishonesty. He stared at the cursor for a moment, then began to type. As Mercer sends the email, an unseen copy of Jamal's model, dated, signed, and witnessed, has already been received by an unexpected recipient. A visiting scholar reviewing new innovations for an upcoming journal. There was no announcement, no email, no official reprimand. But the atmosphere around Jamal Whitaker changed like weather, invisible yet undeniable. It started subtly. In Professor Linley's geometry class, Jamal's hand was no longer called on, even when it was the only one raised. In the corridor, faculty members who once nodded politely now shifted their eyes to phone screens or distant walls. As he passed, a barista who used to know his order at the campus cafe now needed him to repeat it 3 times, then got it wrong anyway. At first Jamal thought he was imagining it. He'd grown up learning to double-check his own instincts. He'd been taught by his mother that black boys don't get to trust first impressions. But this wasn't paranoia. This was pattern. The confirmation came the following Monday, when Jamal walked into lecture 5 minutes early and found his name missing from the attendance sheet. Again, he stood there staring at the clipboard in disbelief until the TA, a nervous second-year PhD named Theo Myers, looked up from the projector setup. Oh, Theo mumbled, rubbing the back of his neck. Weird. Must have been a spreadsheet error. I'll add you back. But this was the 3rd time in 2 weeks. Jamal said nothing. He simply pulled out his notebook and took his seat in the same row where he always sat. Second center, right under Dr. Mercer's line of vision. A protest not of voice, but of presence. Mercer didn't acknowledge him. The lecture started, full of sharp tangents and thinly veiled references to originality and authorship. He glanced over Jamal once twice but never engaged him directly. And when a question was posed to the class, Jamal's quiet response was overridden by Mercer calling on a student in the back, a white boy who stumbled through the answer Jamal had just given. It didn't stop there. Jamal's presentation slot for the upcoming Independent Research Week was abruptly reassigned. The department's calendar claimed a scheduling conflict, but when he checked, the time slot had been given to a sophomore who hadn't even registered for the showcase. Jamal emailed the coordinator. No reply. He wasn't being erased. He was being erased quietly, wordlessly, systematically. A few classmates still nodded to him in passing, mostly those from lower income or minority backgrounds. But the majority kept their distance. No one said it aloud, but the implication had been planted. Jamal wasn't trustworthy. Not because of evidence, because of suggestion, rumor, bias. And Mercer, he said nothing to Jamal in public ever. But Jamal had a feeling that Mercer was speaking often, just not to him. One evening, Jamal stayed late at the library to finish refining his recursive theorem. He sat at the same back corner table, surrounded by books and blank paper. His notebook was now thick with equations, crossed-out variables, arrows, and annotations. But one page was different. Clean, clear, and brilliant. It was his model. His own. A theory that, if proven at scale, could shift how convergence was taught in higher mathematics. A system that made certain unsolvable problems not just solvable, but elegant. And he had built it entirely in silence, under scrutiny, beneath the weight of whispered doubt. As Jamal packed up that night, he noticed something strange. A professor he didn't recognize, tall, bald, wearing a beige trench coat, had passed by his table 3 times. On the last pass, the man glanced at Jamal's open notebook. Not long enough to be rude, just long enough to notice. Then he was gone. The next day, Jamal arrived early to his seminar room and found the whiteboard still covered in equations from the previous class. Among them, written in a different hand, was a phrase in faint marker: "Proof lives in pattern, not permission." He stared at it for a long time before erasing it. But it stuck with him. That afternoon, while walking through the science quad, Jamal heard his name. Mr. Whitaker? He turned. It was the man from the library, trench coat and all, now standing with a tote bag full of lecture notes and a warm, unreadable smile. "I'm Dr. Elliot Markham, visiting from Carnegie Mellon. I'm auditing faculty here for a semester," the man said. "I heard about your work." Jamal froze. "My work?" "The recursive system." Mercer mentioned something in passing. Didn't provide details, but he seemed unsettled. Jamal's chest tightened. "Did he accuse me of something?" Markham chuckled softly. Not directly, but his tone said more than his words. There was a pause. Then, "Would you mind showing it to me?" Markham asked. Privately. Off record. Jamal studied the man. He looked clean-cut, measured. But something about his approach was genuine. Curious without condescension. "I'll think about it," Jamal said cautiously.
Markham nodded. "Fair. Here's my card.
"My door's open." He left without pressure. No promises. No flattery. Jamal stood there, the card between his fingers, heart pounding. Maybe Mercer had meant to discredit him. But in doing so, he had accidentally lit a beacon. That evening, Jamal returns to his dorm to find a slip of paper under his door. Anonymous, handwritten and chilling. "Careful who you trust. Not all visitors leave empty-handed." Jamal Whitaker knew how to shrink himself. It wasn't something he'd learned in calculus or read in a textbook. It was instinctual. A survival skill polished over years of being the only black kid in the room where excellence was both expected and doubted. At Riverside Tech, that ability became second nature. The quieter he moved, the more he could see. And lately there was a lot to see. Dr. Mercer's office hours were now filled with students whispering about Jamal when they thought he wasn't around. He'd walk by open doors and catch phrases like, "He's faking it," or "No way he wrote that theory himself." Professors who once exchanged scholarly curiosity with him now avoided eye contact altogether. His advisor had started forgetting their monthly check-ins. A new layer of glass had been installed between him and the faculty, invisible, but unmistakably present. And in class, Jamal had learned not to speak. It wasn't fear. It was wariness. Every time he raised his hand, Mercer would call on someone else. Every time he submitted an assignment with advanced thinking or original structure, it would come back with vague comments like "too ambitious," or "revised to stay within scope." The message was clear: fit in, not ahead. So Jamal began code switching, not in language but in thought. In group assignments, he dialed down his ideas. He spoke softly, avoided academic jargon, and let others take the lead, even when he knew their math was flawed. When called on in seminars, he gave the answer, never the insight. He allowed space for mediocrity to breathe, so his brilliance wouldn't be resented. But at night, when the halls quieted and the whispers faded, Jamal came alive. He converted his closet into a study lab. A single lamp, stacks of draft paper, and a digital chalkboard he bought off Craigslist. It wasn't fancy, but it was his sanctuary, the one place he didn't have to filter himself. By now, his new model had matured into something revolutionary. He called it divergent integration theory, a framework for resolving contradictions within asymptotic series without needing to collapse them into convergent forms. It was precise, flexible, and completely original. Jamal wasn't chasing grades anymore. He was chasing truth. But every revelation came at a cost. His sleep suffered. He missed meals. Some days he felt his throat tighten before stepping into a classroom. The pressure to not outshine others was heavier than the calculus proofs he carried. And still, the attacks came. One morning, as he entered Mercer's lecture, he noticed a red sticky note on his desk. There was no name, just one line. Genius doesn't need to brag. Jamal stared at it for a moment, then slipped it into his pocket. He didn't react. He'd stopped giving them the satisfaction. But inside, something cracked. After class, he confronted Theo, the TA. Have you heard anything about my research? From Mercer or anyone else? Theo glanced around. I mean, there's talk. People are saying you're making things up to get attention. Even after I showed him my work, Theo hesitated. He said, well, Mercer told a few of us that your calculations raise red flags, that the math is too advanced for someone with your level of experience. Jamal stared. He actually said that? Something close. The mask slipped for a second, the rage flashing behind Jamal's eyes. He looked away. Thanks, he muttered. That night, he went deeper into his model. He started coding a simulation to visualize his theory, a 3D rendering that could bring his math to life. It wasn't required for any class, but he didn't care. He needed something that spoke louder than Mercer's doubts. And then, a new wrinkle. The university announced a special research showcase to host visiting scholars, tech investors, and press, a chance for students to present emerging ideas. Jamal applied immediately. He submitted a detailed abstract, minus Mercer's name, and uploaded a visual draft of his divergent model. He knew the risks. Mercer controlled the committee. But 2 days later, an unexpected notification hit his inbox. Proposal accepted. No fanfare. No comments. Just a date and time. Jamal didn't celebrate. He didn't trust it yet. And sure enough, 2 days before the event, he received another email. Due to a scheduling conflict, your presentation slot has been reassigned. Please contact your advisor for rescheduling options. No explanation. He forwarded the message to the department head. No reply. The next morning, he checked the showcase list. His name was gone. In its place, a second-year student who had once asked to see Jamal's notes after class. That's when Jamal stopped playing by the rules. He copied every draft of his theory, every video log of him explaining the equations, every time-stamped note and simulation file, and backed them up to 3 separate encrypted drives. Then, without Mercer's knowledge, he reached out to Dr. Elliot Markham, the visiting scholar who had approached him weeks earlier. The message was short. I'm ready to show you the model. Markham replied within the hour. Let's meet tomorrow. Off campus. The next evening, in the corner of a quiet coffee shop, 2 blocks from campus, Jamal spread out his notebook, opened his laptop, and began walking Markham through the theory. The older man listened intently, occasionally asking questions, never interrupting. As the simulation unfolded on screen, a visual dance of recursive loops and collapsing variables, Markham leaned back, eyes wide. This is extraordinary, he said, almost in a whisper. Jamal stayed silent. Markham looked up. Why haven't you published this? Because someone's trying to erase me, Jamal said plainly. Markham nodded slowly. Then maybe it's time you stop asking for permission. As they packed up, Jamal handed him a printed version of the theory. Review it. Peer review it. Tear it apart if you want. I won't need to, Markham said, but I will share it with the right people. Jamal nodded once, then left. The cold night air felt sharper than usual, but for the first time in weeks, The pressure in his chest lifted. Maybe the war wasn't over, but he'd just found his first real ally. Back on campus, Dr. Mercer receives a confidential inquiry from a top-tier academic journal, requesting background on a submission by Jay Whitaker. They are preparing to feature on their next cover. Langley Auditorium was packed. Rows of faculty, graduate students, and a few ambitious undergrads filled every seat, the air humming with anticipation. At the front of the room, a large projector screen glowed with the title of the day's presentation, Re-examining Classical Continuity, a Modern Defense of Cauchy's Framework. Dr. Ronald Mercer, Chair of Applied Mathematics. Jamal stood near the back, notebook in hand, heart steady. He wasn't supposed to be here, at least not on paper. Mercer had forgotten to include him on the invite list, but Dr. Elliot Markham had quietly sent him a forwarded copy, and Jamal knew exactly what Mercer was planning. The lights dimmed. Mercer took the stage, sharp as ever, crisp suit, controlled voice, eyes scanning the audience like a performer gauging his crowd. "Thank you all for attending," he began. "Today's presentation reaffirms the validity of Cauchy's limit definitions, particularly in light of recent unconventional propositions circulating within the department." A few chuckles rippled through the room. Mercer didn't name Jamal, but the subtext was radioactive. Jamal sat quietly, back straight. Mercer launched into his talk, smooth, practiced, armed with PowerPoint slides and decades of institutional authority. His thesis: modern attempts to refute classical continuity models were flawed, lacking rigor, and he implied with a smirk, often born of youthful enthusiasm over seasoned logic. Then something strange happened. The seminar moderator, Dr. Yvonne Castle, a tenured statistician known for her fairness, raised her hand near the end of Mercer's talk. "Ron," she said, in the spirit of academic openness, "why don't we open the floor for feedback? We've got several new minds in the room today. Maybe they can offer new perspectives." Mercer stiffened. "Of course," he said tightly, stepping aside. Silence. Then Jamal stood. Heads turned instantly. Mercer's lips parted, but no words came. Jamal's voice was calm. "Dr. Mercer, I appreciate your analysis, but there's a subtle error in your extrapolation of Cauchy's second-order function, specifically in your assumption that the epsilon-delta framework applies universally across discontinuous convergence." Murmurs sparked like fire in dry brush. Mercer blinked. "And what exactly do you mean?" Jamal stepped forward, flipping open his notebook. "If you trace the curve on slide 12, your model fails once the derivative approaches infinity on a limit-bound tangent. That contradiction violates the very principle of Cauchy's foundational logic, unless you reframe it under recursive divergence, as I've proposed in my recent publication." Markham, seated 3 rows from the front, raised an eyebrow. He'd already reviewed Jamal's paper, and now the student had just publicly referenced a theory only a few hands had even seen. Mercer's expression darkened. "I'm not aware of any publication under your name," he said sharply. Jamal's tone didn't change. "The Journal of Mathematical Progression is issuing its winter edition next month. I received acceptance last week." Dead silence. No one moved. Then, slowly, Dr. Castle leaned toward the screen, squinting at Mercer's chart. "He's right," she murmured. "That derivative does collapse." Mercer's jaw clenched. "This isn't the time for student grandstanding," he said, trying to retake control. "There's a reason undergraduates aren't leading departmental seminars." But Jamal didn't flinch. "There's also a reason we invite critique, to avoid dressing up old mistakes in new terminology." A graduate student in the 3rd row coughed, clearly hiding a laugh. Mercer's face flushed, his grip on the clicker tightening. But the crowd was shifting, not laughing at him, not mocking him, but no longer intimidated. Jamal hadn't just corrected a slide, he'd challenged the myth of Mercer's infallibility. And won. "Let's adjourn," Mercer snapped, already gathering his notes. "Thank you all." No applause. Just silence. Jamal returned to his seat, but Markham caught his eye and gave a barely perceptible nod. Respect, earned and witnessed. Outside the auditorium, a few students lingered, asking Jamal about the recursive model. One of them, a postdoc, offered to connect him with another journal. Jamal thanked them, but kept moving. His heart was racing, but his steps were grounded. He had walked through fire, and still stood. But Mercer wasn't finished. The next morning, Jamal opened his email and froze. Subject: Academic Integrity Review. Note: inside, a formal letter signed by Dean Hargrave, requesting that he attend a hearing regarding unauthorized distribution of unpublished departmental materials and potential misrepresentation of authorship. No one mentioned Mercer's name, but the fingerprints were unmistakable. The timing was no coincidence. The room had watched Jamal eclipse him. Now Mercer was trying to bury him. As Jamal prepares to respond to the misconduct hearing, an anonymous package arrives at his dorm. Inside, a printed copy of Mercer's unpublished grant proposal, and shockingly, it contains sections nearly identical to Jamal's theory. The summons came printed on thick cardstock, folded neatly in a white envelope with the university's seal embossed in gold. Notice of Tribunal Review, Allegation, Academic Misconduct. Jamal sat on the edge of his dorm bed, reading it 3 times. He already knew the contents by heart. What struck him wasn't the accusation, it was the tone, formal, sterile, detached, as if his name were just another checkbox. The hearing was scheduled for Friday at 10 a.m. in Langley Conference Room B, a place usually reserved for tenure reviews and donor meetings. Now it would serve as a stage for Jamal to defend not just his work, but his very existence as a legitimate mind. He spent the next 3 nights barely sleeping, not because he feared losing, but because he already knew how the game was stacked. He gathered every document he had, scanned copies of his original notes, dated as far back as his first week of classes, email threads between him and Dr. Markham, logs from simulation software, and most importantly, time-stamped videos showing him walking through each mathematical step alone, on camera in real time. He printed everything twice. The morning of the hearing, Jamal wore a plain navy sweater and khakis. No tie, no attempt to look the part. He wasn't interested in playing dress-up for people already suspicious of his brilliance. When he entered the tribunal room, the chill hit him first. 3 professors sat on one side of a long mahogany table. All white. All senior faculty. 2 men. 1 woman. The nameplates in front of them read like legacy bricks on a university wall. Dr. Keene, Dr. Halberd, and Dr. Ellen Crane. Across from them, sitting rigid and righteous, was Dr. Ronald Mercer. Jamal took his seat alone. Dr. Crane spoke first. Mr. Whitaker, this hearing is to evaluate whether the work you submitted for departmental and external review was developed independently, and whether it violates any university standards regarding plagiarism, misattribution, or unauthorized use of departmental materials. She didn't look him in the eye. Mercer leaned forward, hands folded. With all due respect, this situation could have been avoided had Mr. Whitaker disclosed the source of his inspiration. The mathematical architecture in his model bears striking similarity to components of a faculty grant proposal currently under confidential review. Jamal's face didn't move. That's interesting, he said, because I received that proposal anonymously, after my theory had already been submitted to the Journal of Mathematical Progression. He pulled a sheet from his folder, slid it across the table. You can see the submission timestamp here. 3 days before Mercer's grant was filed. And here he opened his laptop as a video from my dorm room. I start the base model from scratch. No notes, no reference, just logic. The video began playing. Jamal on camera, disheveled from lack of sleep, walking through the theorem step by step with whiteboard equations and verbal narration. The date and time blinked clearly in the corner. The professors leaned in slightly, watching. Mercer scoffed. Students can manipulate timestamps. It's not difficult, which is why I also submitted drafts to Dr. Markham during peer review. Jamal replied. He can verify the progression over weeks, including errors, including edits, unless we're suggesting he's part of a conspiracy now. Dr. Keene cleared his throat. Let's keep this civil. But it wasn't civil. Jamal felt it in their questions. The coded language, the narrowed eyes. Dr. Halberd leaned forward. Tell us, Mr. Whitaker, where exactly did you first encounter the recursive logic needed for this theory? Be specific. I didn't encounter it, Jamal said. I developed it. But how? Halberd pressed. You have no prior published work, no graduate mentor. Your background. My background is mine, Jamal said. Steady. And I don't need a title to build ideas. Just space to think. Crane frowned. You can't blame us for being skeptical. Genius at your level, without collaboration, is highly unusual. No, Jamal said quietly. It's just unusual when it's coming from someone who looks like me. That line hung in the air. Heavy. True. They didn't respond. They didn't have to. Mercer broke the silence. Let's be honest. The theory is elegant. But elegance doesn't equal authorship. I've spent decades in this field. If I couldn't develop it, how could a first-year undergrad? That was the heart of it. Not the math. The audacity of a black student claiming brilliance in a room built to keep him out. Jamal leaned forward. I'm not here to prove that I'm smarter than you, he said. I'm here to prove that I did the work. That my brain, my background, my process, they're enough. Even if I don't sound like you. Even if I don't look like the authors in your journals. No one spoke for a full 10 seconds. Then Crane sighed, scribbling something in her notes. This review is under consideration. You'll receive the outcome within 10 business days. Jamal stood. Don't do this quietly, he said. If you're going to erase me, don't do it behind an email. Say it out loud. He walked out. The air outside felt sharper than it had that morning. But Jamal didn't slow down. He didn't check his phone. He didn't look back. He went straight to his dorm, shut the door, and collapsed into his desk chair. His phone buzzed once. A new email. From Editor Journal of Mathematical Progression. Subject Publication Confirmation POS Editor's Note. He clicked. Inside was more than just approval. It was a letter. We are not only publishing Mr. Whitaker's work. We are also including an editorial note on the barriers he has faced at your institution. His theory is one of the most promising contributions we've seen from any academic level in years. It is disheartening that it took independent channels to acknowledge it. The academic world must do better, and that begins with accountability. Jamal's hand tightened around the mouse. For the first time, someone with power had spoken, loudly. Within hours, the university's internal portal crashes from traffic. Students, alumni, and reporters are all trying to access Jamal's tribunal file, which someone has just leaked anonymously. The first upload appeared on a Thursday night, quietly dropped into a student-run Reddit thread titled, "Riverside's Math Department Has a Problem." At first it seemed like a standard classroom clip, just grainy lecture footage, captured from a phone propped up on a desk. In it, Jamal Whitaker stands at the whiteboard, calmly correcting a mistake in Dr. Mercer's derivation. His voice is clear, composed, his posture grounded. It's the moment from the seminar, the one where he publicly dismantled Mercer's continuity model. The video alone might have made waves, but the student who posted it did something else, something explosive. They edited it side by side with footage from Jamal's tribunal hearing. Somehow they'd obtained it. Audio synced perfectly, showing Mercer accusing Jamal of plagiarism just days after being corrected in public. Side by side, the contrast was devastating. On one screen, Jamal, fluidly proving a groundbreaking mathematical theory. On the other, Mercer, calling that same theory too sophisticated to be authored by a student with no formal research background. The clip hit Twitter at 9:42 p.m. By midnight it had been viewed 40,000 times. By morning it was on fire. The hashtags arrived fast. Let Jamal think. Math is black. Riverside exposed. Who stole the proof? Influencers reposted it. Activists broke it down. Mathematicians from other universities jumped in, offering analysis and, more importantly, support. Even TikTok got involved. One creator played the tribunal audio over slow-motion footage of Jamal walking into the seminar, hoodie up, books in hand, as Kendrick Lamar's "Alright" played in the background. It was cinematic, it was painful, it was viral, and suddenly, Jamal Whitaker was no longer a student quietly fighting to defend his theory. He was a symbol. Inside the university, panic erupted. By 10 a.m., the administration's inboxes were flooded with emails, demanding answers. News outlets began circling. CNN posted a breaking headline. Black math prodigy accused of cheating. After outshining white professor, internet erupts. The dean's office went dark. Mercer stopped appearing on campus. His name was quietly removed from 2 guest panels he was scheduled to lead. But it was too late for silence. The truth had slipped past the institution's gates and into the open air, and the internet wasn't letting go. In his dorm room, Jamal sat in stunned silence. His phone buzzed every 10 seconds. Text from strangers, emails from journalists, DMs from students he'd never met. Some messages were heartwarming, solidarity, encouragement, awe. Others were terrifying, threats, slurs, warnings to stay in his lane. But the message was clear. The story was no longer confined to Riverside. It belonged to the world now. And Jamal was at the center. Across the room, his roommate, a political science major named Trent, scrolled through the feed with wide eyes. "Bro, you're trending above the midterms." Jamal didn't smile. It's not a game, he said. I know, Trent said softly. That's why it's wild. You didn't just go viral. You got heard. That doesn't happen. Jamal stared at the screen. One clip showed Mercer's exact quote from the tribunal. This work doesn't align with the academic profile of someone at Mr. Whitaker's stage. Another clip followed with a reaction from a black professor at Howard University. Translation: he's too black to be brilliant. The university finally released a statement. 2 paragraphs of vague regret. We value diversity of thought. The university is committed to investigating all claims fairly. But no apology, no retraction, and no accountability. That same day, Mercer appeared on a local news affiliate. Not in person via Zoom, his background a carefully curated home office. I think this has gotten out of hand, he said. There's important context missing. I've mentored students of all backgrounds. This is about academic integrity, not race. But the interviewer didn't let him off easy. She pulled up a quote. If I couldn't develop it, how could a first-year undergrad? Mercer tried to backpedal. I meant in terms of access, not ability. You have to understand how advanced this theory is. The internet understood, and they weren't buying it. Then something unexpected happened. Late one evening, Jamal received an email from a tech firm based in Palo Alto. Not just any firm, but Zentrobyte, one of the largest names in cloud-based computing and predictive analytics. Subject: private consultation inquiry. The message was short, clean, and corporate. We've seen your work. Several of our R&D leads believe your recursive convergence model could be adapted into our predictive frameworks. Are you available for a private call this week? Jamal read it twice. Then a third time. Trent leaned over. That's real. That's them. Jamal exhaled, scrolling to the bottom. There was a direct number, an offer for compensation, a non-disclosure form. It wasn't a job offer, not yet, but it was something Mercer had never given him. Respect. Still, Jamal hesitated. What would it mean to step into their world, where his math wasn't just admired, but monetized? Would he be seen or exploited? He opened a new tab and searched Zentrobyte's leadership. Board of directors, all white. Executive team, 1 black engineer, mid-level. He frowned. Then his phone buzzed again. A text from a number he didn't recognize. Check your DMs, urgent. Jamal opened Twitter. In his inbox was a message from a former Riverside student. Anonymous username, but profile marked with graduation year. Attached was a screenshot. Mercer had once been accused of suppressing a similar theory from another black student. Nearly a decade ago, the student had since disappeared from academia. No publications, no trace, just gone. The message was simple. You're not the first, but you might be the last if you don't fight back louder. Jamal stared at the screen. The fight wasn't just about his name anymore. It was about every brilliant black mind that had been silenced before him. Jamal drafts an open letter titled, The Cost of Thinking While Black, and before he can publish it, an unexpected knock echoes at his dorm door. Standing there isn't a student or faculty member, it's a lawyer from Zentrobyte in person. The man at Jamal's door was clean-shaven, mid-40s, dressed in a dark wool coat with a silver Zentrobyte pin, clipped neatly on his lapel. His posture was rigid, like someone used to courtrooms, not campuses. Jamal Whitaker? He asked. Jamal didn't answer right away. He glanced behind the man. No car, no visible team. Just a quiet hallway, and one very formal stranger holding a leather briefcase. I'm Richard Anson, senior counsel for Zentrobyte, the man said. We didn't want to handle this over email. May I come in? Jamal hesitated, then nodded, stepping aside. Inside, Richard placed his briefcase on the desk. Didn't sit. He opened it, slid out a sealed envelope, and pushed it gently across the surface. We're prepared to make you an offer, he said. One that recognizes both the intellectual integrity and future application of your divergent integration model. We believe it could become a core component in predictive machine learning, and possibly change the game entirely in dynamic systems architecture. Jamal's pulse didn't rise. Not yet, because his mind was still stuck on one word: integrity. He opened the envelope and scanned the document inside. It wasn't just an NDA or consultation form. It was a licensing agreement. Full rights retained by him. Terms negotiable. A multi-phase partnership. Equity shares. It was more money than anyone in his family had seen in 3 generations. Still, he didn't smile. Richard noticed. You're quiet. Jamal nodded. Because I've seen this movie before. Richard raised an eyebrow. Excuse me? Jamal looked him straight in the eye. A powerful white man in a suit offers a black kid a seat at the table, right after another powerful white man tried to take his chair. Richard didn't flinch. We're not here to erase you. We're here because someone already tried to and failed. That landed. Richard continued. Before we proceed, I'd like to show you something. One of our advisors forwarded it to us last night. He pulled out a second folder, thinner, marked proposal excerpt. Mercer R. Jamal stiffened. Richard slid it open. Inside were 7 pages from a research grant, recently submitted to the National Science Collaborative Fund. The abstract was nearly identical to Jamal's own model, only phrased slightly differently. The recursive theory had been renamed, the variables reformatted, the visual models simplified. But the core, unmistakably his. Jamal's breath caught in his throat. He flipped through the pages, eyes scanning faster now. Mercer had taken Jamal's core theorem and blended it with a few surface-level modifications, as if that would mask the theft. Worse, the grant had already been shortlisted for preliminary review. It was flagged internally for unusual formatting, inconsistencies, Richard explained. One of our data engineers who had read your work noticed the overlap and escalated it. Jamal set the pages down slowly. This was deeper than ego. This was intellectual theft. Monetized. A theory he had labored over in the shadows, stolen, rebranded, and sold by the same man who accused him of fraud. The betrayal cut sharper than any slur. Not because it was unexpected, but because it was rehearsed. Jamal stood, walked to the window. Outside, students rushed across the quad, bundled in coats, unaware of the quiet war unfolding in room 3. He spoke without turning. This isn't just theft. This is colonial math. Strip the source, rename the formula, and leave the author behind. Richard exhaled slowly. We agree, and we're prepared to act on it, if you're ready. Jamal turned. Not yet. Richard blinked. Why? Because I need to know how far it goes. If Mercer submitted this, what else has he buried? Richard nodded. You're thinking legacy pattern theft. I'm thinking this isn't his first time. The attorney hesitated, then offered his card. When you're ready to move forward, we'll be behind you, but we recommend you tread carefully. If Mercer's reputation is threatened, he won't go down quietly. That night, Jamal didn't sleep. He spread both copies, his original work and Mercer's doctored proposal, across the floor. The similarities screamed, but the intent, that's what haunted him. Mercer hadn't just copied him, he had anticipated credit, preempted the spotlight, and packaged Black brilliance as academic inheritance, and no one questioned it, because no one ever did. 2 days later, an anonymous email arrived. Subject, you're not alone. The body was blank, but the attachment was not. Jamal clicked. Inside, a PDF titled Lab Notes Spring Archive. Dozens of scanned pages, memos, emails, draft feedback, all from Mercer's private lab. Many were redacted, but not all. And halfway through, Jamal found it. A note dated March of the previous year. Student JW presents theory exceeding expected parameters. Advise minimizing platform exposure. Recommend rerouting ideas into faculty paper for further funding potential. His initials. His voice, buried in someone else's ambition. Attached was a second message. We tried to speak once. We were silenced. Use this. But be smart. Jamal leaned back in his chair, breath slow but heavy. This wasn't just theft. This was a pattern. Mercer had done this before. To others. To him, and likely to whoever came next. Just as Jamal begins drafting a formal complaint with the new evidence, his inbox pings again. This time from a private address marked faculty witness. The subject line reads, you don't know the half of. The subject line said everything. You don't know the half of it. Jamal stared at the email on his laptop, the glow of the screen painting his face in pale light. The sender's address was a cryptic string, clearly anonymized, but the tone of the message underneath was anything but robotic. You've uncovered Mercer's theft. But what if I told you it didn't start with you? There was an encrypted folder attached. A password followed below. No. Jamal typed it in. A window blinked open. Inside were multiple subfolders, each labeled by year 2000. Inside each folder, student names, course records, drafts of theses, email exchanges, and internal grading memos. But they all had something else in common. Every student was Black, and every file told the same story. a quiet, calculated pattern of suppression. Jamal clicked into the first folder. J. Dunham. Inside was a research paper, a complex early framework on nonlinear differential equations with machine learning applications. It wasn't groundbreaking like Jamal's, but it was clearly ahead of its time. Beside the paper was Mercer's feedback, scrawled in red: unclear authorship, style too advanced, suggest simplification or retraction. An email followed, dated 3 weeks later. Unfortunately, we cannot move forward with your research presentation. Focus on completing core coursework first. The next file, C. Miles, 2008, showed a recommendation request, never responded to. The student followed up 6 times. Final note in the folder. Withdrew from program after failing to secure fellowship, and folder after folder after folder mirrored the same arc. Advanced black students who produced forward-thinking work. Mercer casting doubt. Opportunities mysteriously vanishing. All of it swept away like chalk dust. Then Jamal opened a final folder, separated from the others. Its title read, There She Was, Elle Kavanagh, the whistleblower. Inside was a CV, a thesis draft, and audio files. Jamal clicked on one. Ella's voice younger, breathless. I submitted that theory a month ago. I have the draft saved. Mercer told me it lacked structure, but now he's using it in his own talk. How is that not theft? Pause. If I go to the department, what happens? You know what they'll say. He's the gatekeeper. He's the one who gets you published, who writes your letters. If I cross him, the file cut off. Jamal leaned back in his chair. This wasn't just a list of ruined opportunities. It was a record of intellectual violence, theft, denial, and gaslighting, carried out over decades under the guise of academic rigor. He opened a new email and wrote, to Elle de Kavanagh at protonmail. Subject, I'm ready to listen. Body, I saw your file, and I believe you. Jamal. He hit send. The reply came within hours. Meet me tomorrow. Same coffee shop where Markham met you. 4:30 p.m. When Jamal arrived, the woman waiting for him was in her early 40s. She wore no makeup, her short curls tucked under a beanie. Her coat was fraying at the sleeves. She wasn't someone who moved through the world needing attention, but her eyes were sharp, clear, and full of memory. Ella? Jamal asked. She nodded. Didn't expect the spotlight to hit Mercer this late in his career. Honestly thought he'd slip into retirement without anyone knowing. You tried to tell them. I tried, she said, voice flat. Lost my PhD track over it. My advisor said Mercer had concerns about my teamwork. Said I wasn't taking feedback well. You know how it goes. Jamal did. She slid a flash drive across the table. Everything I gave you is real. But there's more. I started collecting proof after I left. Quietly. Reached out to old students, some black faculty, who watched it happen. We've been waiting for the right moment. Jamal stared at the drive. Why now? Elle smiled. Not with joy, but grim satisfaction. Because you happened, and they can't ignore it anymore. She pulled out a manila folder. Here's the kicker. Mercer didn't just plagiarize ideas. He manipulated grades. Jamal blinked. Grades? She opened a folder. Photocopies of grade logs. Highlighted discrepancies. Internal memos. He used a back-end loophole in the grade submission system. Claimed students hadn't submitted revisions. Marked them incomplete. Students fought it, but the department always sided with him. Jamal felt his stomach twist. How did no one stop him? They didn't want to, Elle said. He brought in grant money, published just enough, and he was untouchable. Until now. That night, Jamal sat with Trent at their dorm, spreading out the files like case evidence. This is bigger than him stealing your model, Trent said, eyes wide. This is a decades-long pattern. Jamal nodded. And I'm not the only victim. Just the one who finally had a camera on him. They stared at the table. Jamal's journal, Elle's files, the flash drive, the stolen grant proposal, the tribunal transcript. A picture was forming. Dark, undeniable. Then Jamal's phone buzzed. A message from a student in Texas. Saw your thread. Mercer failed me in '09. I still have the emails. Then another, and another. Within 2 hours, over a dozen former students, mostly black, some Hispanic, messaged Jamal, sharing their stories. Failing grades, blocked recommendations, misplaced research. Every one of them said the same thing. No one believed me. Until now. By morning, a quiet legal movement had begun. One of Zentrobite's lawyers put Jamal in touch with a civil rights attorney who specialized in higher education discrimination. Within 24 hours, they had the foundation for a case, not against just Mercer, but against the institution that protected him. A class action lawsuit was being drafted, and this time, it wouldn't be settled quietly. As the legal team prepares to go public, a university board member leaks a message. Mercer's trying to take a deal, full retirement, full pension, if he's allowed to disappear before the lawsuit drops. The silence broke on a Monday morning. An internal memo from the university's faculty ethics committee was leaked to the press. It acknowledged long-standing concerns surrounding Dr. Ronald Mercer's mentorship practices and alleged inconsistencies in evaluation and authorship standards dating back over a decade. It didn't name Jamal, but it didn't have to. Within hours, faculty lounges turned into war rooms. Emails flew. Hallway conversations stopped when certain people walked by. The air buzzed, not with curiosity, but with division. Half the department wanted Mercer gone. The other half wanted Jamal quiet. In the mathematics building, a closed-door faculty meeting turned into a shouting match. Dr. Yvonne Castle stood at the front of the room, her hands shaking not from fear, but fury. "We can't keep pretending this is about process," she said. "Mercer didn't just plagiarize. He orchestrated an entire ecosystem that punished students of color. He's not here to defend himself," another professor snapped, a tenured statistician named Graydon Hurst. "And what you're suggesting is career assassination based on internet outrage and anecdotes." Castle didn't blink. "You mean testimonies, evidence, patterns. You mean mob justice. Call it what you want," she fired back. "But silence is complicity." In the corner, one assistant professor scribbled furiously in a notepad. Another stared at the floor. Even among those who agreed with Castle, few dared speak aloud. Why? Because tenure was currency. Mercer had it. Jamal didn't. Meanwhile, Jamal worked, not in lecture halls or student unions, but in a quiet co-working space funded by Zentrobite, a modern glass-paneled lab off campus with silent rooms, smartboards, and screens as wide as doors. It was here, under LED lights, and away from whispering faculty, that Jamal began preparing for the biggest presentation of his life. A TED-style showcase, hosted by Zentrobite and broadcast to an international audience of engineers, scholars, and investors. But even in this new space, he could feel the eyes. An email arrived from a university administrator. "We understand you've taken time off campus. Please be aware that your enrollment status is being reviewed based on current investigations." No context. No proof. Just pressure. Zentrobite's legal team responded swiftly. "Any move to penalize Mr. Whitaker for participating in a professional research event will result in legal intervention." The university backed down, publicly. But quietly, the walls tightened. At the same time, Mercer's allies began re-emerging. Old faculty colleagues released subtle statements. Nothing bold, but enough to stir doubt. "Dr. Mercer has mentored hundreds of students. He's been a pillar of academic integrity. Let's not destroy a man's career over one narrative." Some quoted Jamal's TED Showcase announcement sarcastically. "A TED Talk? Already? What happened to humility?" Others whispered what Mercer had first implied, that Jamal was too polished, too camera-ready, too poised to be real. As if brilliance needed to look more grateful. As if black excellence had to come dressed in apology. Jamal read the comments but didn't reply. He poured himself back into his math, because underneath the noise, his theory had grown again. The divergent integration model had evolved. With the help of Zentrobite's engineers, Jamal had expanded it into a live simulation tool, a framework that could be used in predictive analytics, AI, and even medical research. The same formula, Mercer said, was too advanced for him now had multi-million-dollar applications. But Jamal wasn't chasing checks. He was building legacy. 2 days before the showcase, Jamal met with Dr. Castle privately. She arrived at the lab dressed plainly, carrying a flash drive, and something rarer, warmth. "I don't know how you're holding this together," she said softly. "I don't," Jamal replied. "I just keep going." She handed him the drive. "Here. It's Mercer's department reviews. Internal notes." He blocked at least 3 black students from graduate-level seminars over compatibility concerns. "I can't say it publicly, not yet, but you can use it if you need to." Jamal stared at the files, his throat tightening. "Why are you helping me?" he asked. Because I should have helped El Cavanaga. I stayed silent then. I'm not doing it again. He nodded, unable to find the words. The day before the showcase, Jamal rehearsed his opening line a dozen times. He stood in front of the mirror, back straight, palms sweating. Good evening. My name is Jamal Whitaker, and I want to show you something they said I didn't write. He stopped, shook his head. It was too defensive. He tried again. My name is Jamal Whitaker. I'm a mathematician, and I believe brilliance doesn't need permission. Better. He scribbled notes, adjusted his pacing, reviewed his visuals. Then, just after midnight, a ping echoed from his laptop.
New message. No sender.
Subject line: stay in your lane. No body text. Just a single attachment, an image of his dorm door taken that night. Jamal froze. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. The fear wasn't loud. It was silent, heavy, paralyzing. Not because he didn't expect it, but because it reminded him that no matter how far his mind reached, someone would always want to pull his body back into line. He forwarded the message to the university's security and Zentrobyte's legal team. Their replies were immediate. Extra security arranged, legal protections updated, police report filed. But the tension wasn't in the inbox. It was in his chest. Because the threat wasn't just physical, it was psychological. And Mercer didn't need to send it himself. The machine he built was still running, fueled by doubt, protected by silence. As Jamal prepares for the showcase, his phone buzzes with a notification. Mercer has just gone live on national TV, claiming to have co-authored the theory Jamal is about to present. The night air was unusually still. Too still for the kind of anticipation running through Jamal Whitaker's veins. The auditorium lights at Zentrobyte headquarters glowed like a beacon across the Palo Alto skyline. Rows of digital banners displayed his name. Jamal Whitaker, the divergent integration model, rethinking recursive systems. It was the moment every mathematician dreams of. A chance to be seen, not as a student, not as a subject of controversy, but as a mind. And yet, beneath the shimmer of stage lights, something dark lingered. The showcase was scheduled for 7 p.m. The building had been secured since noon. Cameramen tested their equipment. Reporters rehearsed intros, and Zentrobyte's legal team ran last-minute checks on statements of authorship, ensuring Jamal's work was protected under federal intellectual property law. At 6:12, everything collapsed. It started with a single word over the intercom. Evacuate. Within seconds, the alarm blared. Shrill, mechanical, absolute. Attendees filed toward the exits, clutching laptops, purses, and phones. Security personnel moved fast, ushering everyone into the parking lot. The air outside was electric with confusion. Lights from squad cars flashed red and blue across the building's glass facade. Jamal stood at the edge of the crowd, watching officers swarm the entrance. What happened? He asked a guard. Anonymous call, the man said. Claimed there's a device in the lower auditorium. Jamal's heart sank. A bomb threat. He didn't need to guess who it was meant for. By 7:05, the auditorium was empty. Police dogs moved through the aisles. Reporters hovered near the barricades, snapping photos. Mercer's name was already trending again, on social media. Not for his crimes, but for his silence. And Jamal knew the timing wasn't random. This was no coincidence. This was suppression in its modern form. Not through expulsion or denial, but disruption. He stared at the flashing lights, jaw tight. They want the silence to speak louder than the proof. Zentrobyte's PR head, a woman named Alina Carter, approached him. We can reschedule, she said softly. Do this next week, with security and cameras ready. No, Jamal said, shaking his head. They'll say the threat worked. They'll say I flinched. She frowned. You're serious? Dead serious. He pulled out his phone. If they can cancel the room, I'll build another one. An hour later, Jamal stood on the rooftop of the Zentrobyte tower, wind cutting across his face, lights from the Bay Area stretching infinitely below him. Around him stood 5 people, a small but powerful group. Dr. Elliot Markham, Dr. Alan Castle, El Kavanagh, a young black data scientist from MIT, and an engineer from Zentrobyte's AI division. Each one had chosen to stand beside him, physically and publicly. A camera crew had followed them up, setting up a tripod, ring lights, and a single microphone. Are you sure? Markham asked quietly. Jamal nodded. They can't evacuate the sky. He opened his laptop, syncing the feed to a global live stream. Starting stream in 3. The red light blinked on. Good evening, Jamal began. His voice steady, the wind tugging at his blazer. My name is Jamal Whitaker. Tonight, I was supposed to stand in a room full of scholars, scientists and students to share an idea born not from privilege but from persistence. He paused, eyes steady on the camera. But tonight, that room was emptied by fear. He stepped forward. So we'll do it here instead, under open air, under no institution's permission, under the sky that belongs to everyone. Behind him, the city lights shimmered like constellations. He turned the screen toward the camera, displaying the first slide, a visual rendering of his divergent integration model. Lines and shapes spiraled in harmonic symmetry, glowing softly under the rooftop lights. This theory began as a rebellion, he said. A rebellion against stagnation, against the idea that only certain kinds of minds can hold certain kinds of power. But rebellion alone doesn't build. Logic does. He began his proof. Every movement was precise, every equation deliberate. He drew on a digital board connected to the stream, walking viewers through recursive loops, dynamic divergence, and error convergence. Concepts that once seemed unreachable to the undergraduates who'd watched Mercer dismiss him. He didn't read from notes. He didn't stumble. His voice carried not arrogance but clarity. This is how we redefine what infinite means, he said, scribbling symbols faster now. Not as an unreachable horizon, but as an ever-evolving process. Infinity isn't distance, it's motion, and motion belongs to those willing to think beyond permission. The chat exploded. Tens of thousands watching, then hundreds of thousands. Comments streamed in from all over the world. Genius in real time. He's rewriting math like Baldwin rewrote language. This is history. And beneath it all, one message appeared again and again. Let Jamal think. Back on campus, professors crowded in faculty offices, watching the stream in stunned silence. Dr. Castle leaned forward, tears in her eyes. He's doing it, she whispered. In another building, Mercer sat alone in his office, lights dim, laptop open. His face was unreadable. The stream reflected in his glasses as Jamal's equations unfolded. Fluid, flawless. Every theorem Mercer had dismissed now proved. Lev to an audience of millions. His hands trembled, but not with admiration, with rage. He opened a new browser tab, logged into an old faculty account, and began typing. Meanwhile, on the rooftop, Jamal reached the final section. The recursive stabilization proof. The air had grown colder, sharper. He didn't notice. Everything you've seen tonight isn't about math, he said softly. It's about access. They told me this was too advanced for someone like me. But brilliance doesn't have a color, and integrity doesn't need a signature. He tapped the final key, the board filled with symbols, an elegant, complete equation. The divergent integration model. Proven, published, undeniable. The rooftop erupted in quiet applause. Not loud, not performative. Just awe. Jamal exhaled for the first time in hours. Markham stepped forward, resting a hand on his shoulder. That's it, he said quietly. You did it. Jamal looked out over the city. I didn't do it to win, he said. I did it to end something. The camera panned out, capturing him framed against the skyline. The young black mathematician who refused to be silenced, who turned a rooftop into a revolution. The feed began to slow, the chat still pouring messages of support and love. And then a notification appeared on screen. New comment: verified account. Dr. Ronald Mercer. This is a gross violation of intellectual property. I will be pursuing legal action immediately. This theory was developed under my supervision, and therefore belongs in part to Riverside Tech University. Jamal froze. The chat exploded again. He's lying. He's desperate. Sue him, Jamal. Protect your work. Markham's eyes narrowed. He's not done. He's about to fight dirty. Jamal stared at the message. Heartbeat steady. Then we'll fight with proof, he said quietly. The same way we always have. Minutes after the stream ends, Jamal's phone buzzes. A court summons from Riverside Tech's legal department. Mercer has officially filed a lawsuit, claiming partial ownership of Jamal's theory. The news cycle hadn't cooled in weeks. What began as a classroom humiliation had erupted into a national reckoning. Major outlets replayed Jamal Whitaker's rooftop presentation like gospel, dissecting his words alongside Mercer's silent shame. But beneath the trending hashtags and viral soundbites, something deeper stirred, a shift from spectacle to accountability. By early fall, Riverside Tech University received formal notification. The Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights, alongside the National Science Foundation's Internal Ethics Division, had launched an inquiry. The allegation racial discrimination in academic funding, bias in faculty tenure decisions, and the unauthorized use of intellectual property. For the first time in the university's history, federal investigators would descend, not for research audits, but to chase the ghosts racism left behind. Jamal, now navigating a complex mix of media attention and emotional exhaustion, was quietly flown to Washington, D.C. He wasn't wearing a suit when he stepped into the congressional briefing room, just a pressed navy shirt, and his mother's chain around his neck. He wasn't here to perform, he was here to testify. Seated across from lawmakers and agency officials, Jamal unfolded the timeline, not with rage, but with razor clarity. He recounted Mercer's dismissal of his equation, the false plagiarism charge, the retracted presentation slot, the whispered conspiracies, and finally the theft of his theory in a multi-million-dollar grant Mercer filed just weeks before the scandal broke. What stunned the room wasn't just what was said, it was the weight of what had been buried. Jamal presented timestamps, draft versions, and encrypted backups of his work. Emails between faculty members surfaced, some jokingly referring to Jamal as the disruption. One email from Mercer read, "This student is trouble, brilliant, but misdirected. I'm steering him off the ledge." It was enough to drop jaws, but it wasn't enough to stop the bleeding. Investigators soon discovered a trail, one that reached far beyond Jamal. Over a dozen grant applications overseen by Mercer had wording, charts, or insights lifted from Black or minority students' unpublished work. Funding decisions had skewed consistently toward white protégés. Recommendations had patterns. Complaints, many of them eerily similar to Jamal's, had been filed years ago and ignored by administrators. Dr. L. Kavanaugh's whistleblower folder was now federal evidence. The narrative she unearthed. Black students mysteriously failing Mercer's class after academic success elsewhere. Mentorships cut off without cause. Conferences attended by everyone except the most brilliant Black minds were suddenly undeniable. One former student's journal read, "I stopped doing math because every answer I gave felt like a mistake in his eyes." The scandal began expanding like a crack in glass. Reporters uncovered Mercer's decades-long dominance over the university's grant selection committee. In leaked recordings, Mercer bragged about filtering the fluff, a euphemism for gatekeeping talent he deemed culturally misaligned. Even a former dean confessed, under oath, that Mercer was untouchable because of his grant-winning streak. Suddenly, no one was safe. Riverside's administration scrambled to issue press statements filled with corporate regret. But the damage was done. A respected donor, a Black philanthropist who had contributed over $30 million to Riverside's diversity initiatives, withdrew all funding, citing the university's complicity through silence. The withdrawal wasn't just symbolic. It cut directly into faculty salaries, research budgets, and expansion projects. Overnight, the university's golden tower began to rust. Jamal, meanwhile, remained focused. He refused most interview requests, opting instead to mentor younger Black students now reaching out in droves. His inbox overflowed with letters, high schoolers inspired by his theory, undergraduates afraid to speak up in class, and faculty members at other institutions quietly revealing similar patterns. But beneath the applause and praise, a darker current brewed. Mercer, though publicly disgraced, hadn't left campus. His sabbatical had turned into a legal warpath. Through his lawyer, he threatened to sue the university, the tech firm, and Jamal himself for defamation and intellectual misappropriation. It was absurd, but absurdity had never stopped the powerful before. Then came the twist no one expected. A buried federal complaint from 7 years prior resurfaced. It had been filed by a Nigerian-American postdoc, claiming Mercer had deliberately sabotaged her dissertation approval. At the time, it was dismissed as miscommunication. Now re-examined in light of Jamal's case, it read like a blueprint. The postdoc had described Mercer using her work to strengthen his own research proposals while casting doubt on her authorship. She too had presented a theory and watched it disappear under Mercer's name. No one believed her back then. But this time, the world was listening. As Jamal sat in a Senate subcommittee, hearing weeks later, the air felt different. Legislators, some skeptical, others deeply moved, asked if he believed racism in academia was systemic or isolated. Jamal didn't hesitate. "It's designed into the system," he said. "You think the crime is a stolen theory? But the real crime is that no one expected someone like me to have one." That line made headlines. But Jamal didn't care about fame. He cared about justice, and now justice had real momentum. A university donor pulls $30 million in response to the scandal. The ivory tower had cracks now. Deep, spidering fractures no amount of polished statements could hide. For the first time in decades, the gates at Riverside Tech University no longer protected the gatekeeper. Dr. Ronald Mercer's name, once uttered with reverence, now lingered in the air like a bad taste. Faculty who once crowded into his seminars now whispered behind closed office doors, uncertain of their own proximity to his legacy. Students walked past his door without glancing. Some even posted sticky notes on it, scrawled with equations signed. After months of mounting pressure, university trustees convened behind oak-paneled walls and forced Mercer into early retirement. Officially, it was framed as a graceful transition, but everyone knew he was being escorted out, not stepping down. But Mercer wasn't done. Days after the announcement, he appeared on a morning news show, flanked by a lawyer and an overly sympathetic anchor. His face looked gaunt but deliberate, his voice smooth yet calculated. "I've dedicated my life to academic excellence," he began, "and I refuse to be the scapegoat for a system's insecurities." He adjusted his glasses. "This narrative about racial bias? It's just that, a narrative. I challenged a student's unverified work. That's what professors do." Then came the pivot. "I'm the real victim here," he said, his voice cracking at just the right moment. "My career, my family's name, destroyed by a smear campaign and media hysteria." It was a desperate play, but desperation has a way of revealing things. Within hours, the interview was dissected across social media. Clips of Mercer feigning victimhood were spliced next to footage of Jamal standing before a Senate subcommittee, explaining how racism isn't always a scream. Sometimes it's a slow erasure. But the biggest blow came not from a journalist or from Jamal. It came from inside Mercer's own past. Bryce Taylor, a former white student and now a mid-level researcher at an East Coast institute, published a confessional blog post titled, "The Paper That Wasn't Mine." In it, he admitted something that had haunted him for years. "In my final year at Riverside, I submitted a thesis under Dr. Mercer's mentorship. The bulk of it was based on a theory he handed me, saying it was from a dropped case file. I didn't ask questions. I was desperate to graduate. Years later, I saw Jamal Whitaker's published model and realized it was the same theory, line by line." The confession shattered whatever illusion Mercer had left to cling to. Suddenly, his entire catalog of mentorships and awards came under suspicion. How many other students had presented someone else's brilliance? How many theories had been redirected through Mercer's hands like stolen mail? Meanwhile, Jamal said nothing publicly. He'd retreated from the media spotlight, working quietly with the tech firm on adaptive learning software based on his mathematical models. But privately, he felt every headline like a bruise. He didn't want Mercer's ruin. He wanted the system that enabled Mercer to rot from the roots. Still, Bryce's confession carried weight. It wasn't just validation, it was exposure. And with it came an avalanche of old students contacting journalists, saying they too had been discouraged, rerouted, or outright replaced in academic circles Mercer controlled. "I thought it was just me," one black woman wrote anonymously. "But now I see, he never saw us as creators, just fuel for his machine." In response to the rising tide of whistleblowers, Riverside launched a second internal investigation, this time into decades of thesis reviews and recommendation letters tied to Mercer's name. Files were unsealed. Discrepancies emerged. A hidden pattern revealed itself. Students of color were rarely endorsed for doctoral programs under his supervision, despite consistently high performance. And the backlash wasn't limited to Riverside. National boards began re-examining Mercer's influence on grant distributions, especially those involving federal funds. His name, once synonymous with calculus excellence, now appeared in ethics probes, database retractions, and denied funding renewals. Still, the most unexpected moment came from Mercer himself. In a last-ditch effort to rewrite the narrative, he penned an op-ed in the Chronicle of Higher Education titled, "When Progress Becomes Persecution." In it, he argued that the academic world had become too fragile to withstand critique, and that his actions were never about race, only about rigor. But his words fell flat. They echoed like hollow defenses against a rising chorus of truth. Because Mercer didn't just fall. He was exposed, peeled back, revealed, and the world had changed too much to unsee it. At the same time, Jamal received an unmarked letter in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of parchment. It was a formal notice. His published work had been shortlisted for the National Medal of Scientific Innovation, the youngest nominee in decades. His theory, once dismissed as too sophisticated to be his, now stood among the most transformative mathematical contributions in recent history. But beneath the official seal was a postscript. Expect scrutiny. Certain committee members still questioned the work's authorship. It wasn't over. Not yet. Jamal folded the letter, sat down at his desk, and stared at the wall where his chalkboard hung. The one from his student days, now framed behind glass. He thought of the long nights, the silences, the restraint it took to hold his fire while Mercer tried to snuff him out. And still, even now, he had to prove he belonged. Jamal's theory is nominated for a National Science Medal. But controversy brews. Fame didn't arrive with fireworks. It seeped in quiet, glittering and suffocating. After the medal nomination, Jamal Whitaker's inbox overflowed with everything he'd once believed was out of reach. Book deal proposals, multi-million-dollar speaking tour offers, Hollywood producers pitching biopics with big-name actors to play him. Morning shows wanted an emotional sit-down, magazines fought for exclusive spreads. Every corner of the world wanted a piece of his pain, polished into digestible brilliance. But Jamal felt hollow. Each new email read like a souvenir from a battle no one cared to understand. Not really. He'd become a symbol, but not a man. On paper, his story had triumphed, but he couldn't unlive what it cost. He still heard Mercer's voice dissecting his intellect. Still felt the burn of walking into rooms where the ceiling got lower the smarter he became. He still remembered the tribunal, the erasure, the white hands holding his theory as if it were their own. Every success now felt like a retrospective apology. And apologies didn't rebuild trust. They just glossed over scars. Late one evening, he stood on the rooftop where he'd once live-streamed his theory. The city lights blinked around him like neurons firing. Alive with potential. But inside he wrestled with a different question. What about the others? The students who never went viral. The ones silenced before the world could know their names. The theories buried. The math lost to racism's quiet theft. Jamal's fingers tightened around the railing. Maybe the real victory wasn't acceptance by a system that tried to kill his mind. Maybe it was to build outside of it. That night he declined the biopic deal. He turned down 3 book contracts and canceled a keynote event that would have paid more than his father earned in 5 years. Instead, he wrote a grant proposal of his own. It was simple in mission but radical in intent. A nonprofit math institute for marginalized youth. A space where curiosity was protected, where equations weren't stolen but celebrated. Where no one had to survive racism, just to learn in peace. He called it the Whitaker Institute for Mathematical Equity. The announcement broke the internet. Celebrities tweeted support. Black scholars nationwide offered to volunteer. High school students started GoFundMe pages just to attend. Within a month, the first location opened in Baltimore, Jamal's hometown. Not in some polished glass tower, but in a renovated library near his childhood park. He walked through the halls on opening day, watching students scribble proofs on whiteboards without hesitation, without fear. No raised eyebrows, no side glances, just math and freedom. One moment stopped him cold. A young girl, maybe 13, with thick braids and eyes sharp with intensity, raised her hand during a group session. "I think I see a different pattern than what's on the board," she said softly. The room fell still. Jamal expected hesitation, maybe even self-correction, but the girl kept going, pointing out a logic route none of the instructors had seen. He smiled. This was the future Mercer. Wouldn't have survived. Still, fame clawed at the edges of his piece. One morning, his assistant burst in mid-meeting, holding a glossy magazine with his face on the cover. The headline read, "From Outcast to Genius. Can Jamal Whitaker save academia?" Jamal stared at it. "I never agreed to this interview. They scraped it from public records. It's happening everywhere now." His name had become currency, and like all currency, people wanted to spend it without permission. He pulled back again, withdrawing into the work-building curriculum, hiring staff, ensuring the institute wouldn't turn into another polished cage, pretending to liberate minds. But he couldn't hide forever. The National Science Medal nomination became a political flashpoint. Conservative think tanks questioned the committee's ideological favoritism. Anonymous editorials argued Jamal's recognition was less about math, more about race. A few even claimed his theory was only famous because of Mercer's involvement. Even after plagiarism had been proven, Every headline was a knife. Reopening wounds he was still learning to stitch shut. Then unexpectedly, a letter arrived, this time handwritten thick with university stationery. It was from Dean Everett, of Riverside Tech. Mr. Whitaker, we write not an apology but an acknowledgement. You changed this university, not through protest, but through perseverance. We would be honored if you considered returning not as a student this time, but as a lecturer. Jamal read the letter twice. He didn't feel flattered. He felt complicated. Returning to the place that once tried to erase him wasn't a victory lap. It was a confrontation. With ghosts. With legacy. With the part of himself that still stood frozen at Mercer's whiteboard, holding a piece of chalk and a room full of silence. He closed the letter and stared out the window of the institute. Students were laughing below, tossing ideas back and forth like they were tangible. That was the math he wanted to protect. Not medals. Not stages. Still, part of him knew some doors must be walked through to be burned down properly. The dean asked Jamal to return, this time as a lecturer. The air inside room 304 smelled the same. Old wood, chalk dust, and a faint trace of worn-out arrogance. The ivy still curled around the window frames, and the door creaked at the same hinge when opened too wide. But this time, Jamal Whitaker wasn't walking in with a backpack and nerves. He was holding a leather binder and a faculty ID. The moment had arrived without ceremony. No cameras, no hashtags. Just a man returning to the site of his unraveling, now with the authority to shape it. He stood at the podium, the very same one where Dr. Mercer once lorded over silence. The memory of that sharp stare, that smug dismissal, still lived in the walls, but they didn't haunt Jamal. Not anymore. Today the faces looking back at him were different. Brown, black, white, queer, immigrant. The front row had 2 girls in hijab. The second row had a disabled student scribbling in adaptive tech. This was a classroom Mercer would have ignored. Jamal looked at it and saw only brilliance. He tapped the mic, cleared his throat, and began. No preamble. No war stories. Just math. His voice carried through the hall with quiet command, fluid and firm. He spoke of abstract variables, like they were pieces of music. He wove complex proofs with poetic rhythm, inviting students not just to follow but to feel. There were no power plays. No spot quizzes to assert dominance. Only collaboration. Every time a student hesitated with a question, Jamal leaned forward, never away. He understood what it cost to speak in rooms that weren't built for your voice. In the 3rd week, he introduced the module that had nearly ended his career, dynamic boundary equations and recursive fractal modeling. He didn't announce it as his theory. He taught it like any other lesson. It was only on the last day of the semester, during his final lecture, that he let the room in on the secret. Jamal turned from the board, chalk still in hand. This model, he said, was once considered too advanced for a student to have created. The room went quiet. No one knew where he was going with it. How was that student? He saw heads lift, eyes lock onto his. Some had heard the story, others hadn't. But now, it wasn't gossip or legend. It was truth, spoken plainly. This theory was doubted, dismissed, stolen. I spent years proving I had the right to think it, but I'm not sharing it now to prove a point. I'm sharing it because you deserve to inherit what once was denied. He stepped back. For a heartbeat, the room was silent. Then came the sound. Not polite applause. A full rising ovation. Students on their feet. Some clapping. Some wiping eyes. Some stunned that their professor had been a battlefield once, and still chose to teach. But Jamal wasn't looking for applause. He scanned the rows not for admiration, but for recognition. He saw it in a young boy in the back row, gripping his pencil like it was armor. In a girl leaning forward as if she'd never seen a teacher give back power, instead of hoard it. After class, students filtered out slowly, some stopping to shake his hand, others too overwhelmed to speak. All but one, a quiet student, maybe 19, lingered by the edge of the chalkboard, notebook clutched to their chest. I have an idea, they said, voice barely above a whisper. Jamal turned. There it was again, the beginning. The raw, flickering spark of a mind stepping toward light. Unsure if the world would let it burn or bury it. Show me, Jamal said, smiling. And in that moment, it was clear. He was no longer the exception. Jamal smiles. He's no longer the exception. He's the door. If you've ever been overlooked, silenced or told you didn't belong, you felt Jamal's story in your bones. They didn't just doubt his math. They doubted his right to dream. But he didn't ask for permission, and neither should we. Type yes if you believe brilliance should never come with a color test. Subscribe if this broke your heart and opened your eyes.